I have spent most of my life putting everyone else's needs above my own. I've devoted decades to caring for my daughter, Elizabeth, and my granddaughter, Sophie, often losing myself in the process. I never thought that sacrificing my own happiness would become the pattern of my life. But here I am, tired, burdened, yet still clinging to hope that someday I might reclaim a piece of the life I once dreamed of. I gave up a promising career as a librarian when Elizabeth was little because I believed that a mother's love meant being there at every moment. There were days when I would watch from the kitchen window as I prepared meals for the family, my dreams shelved along with the books I once cherished. Then there were the years when I held down 2 jobs just to keep our home running. A small, creaking house in a quiet neighborhood that once felt like a haven, but now echoes with memories of sacrifices made in silence. And I gave up my own relationships along the way, allowing loneliness to settle in where hope had once lain. I told myself that no matter the cost, the family must always come first. These choices became so ordinary to me that I hardly ever questioned them. I normalized my suffering without ever admitting to myself that I deserved more. Every aching moment and every sleepless night was simply the price of love. I neglected the very emotional needs that could have brought me joy. A simple conversation with a friend, a quiet evening with a book, or even just a walk in the park without the weight of responsibility pressing on my heart. I became defined by what I gave rather than who I was. People around me often describe me as selfless and devoted, a pillar of strength who silently holds everything together. Yet inside I see a reflection of a tired woman, worn down by years of quiet grief and unspoken regrets. I often feel invisible, like the dust settling in the corners of an old forgotten house. My modest finances limit even the simplest pleasures, a cup of tea in a fresh mug, or a new book to escape into. I have lived in financial precarity, always stretching each dollar, always placing the needs of others far above any desire that I might have for myself. Sometimes when the evening becomes too still, I am swept away by memories that return unbidden. I recall a sunny afternoon from my youth, a flash of warmth when I believed that life would be full of wonder. I remember the excited chatter of my friends as we planned for the future, each of us full of dreams and promise. In that moment, I had envisioned a life where I would explore the world, write stories, and never be afraid to love. But somewhere along the road, I lost that spark, trading youthful ambitions for the endless responsibilities of motherhood. I see that reflection in the quiet lines around my eyes now, a constant reminder of what I sacrificed along the way. Another memory emerges vividly, a chilly evening not long after my husband, William, inexplicably left our lives. The shock of his departure left me numb, yet I felt compelled to be the anchor for Elizabeth, even as my own heart shattered silently. In that moment of profound loss, I buried my pain beneath layers of routine, convinced that my suffering was a necessary price to keep everything intact. That night I sat alone at the kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of tea, silently promising myself that I would never allow my pain to hinder the happiness of those I loved. I became adept at hiding my tears behind a smile that no longer reached my eyes. My life, with its bland decor and faded photographs, mirrors my internal landscape. The modest living room of my home still contains echoes of better days, with a well-worn sofa, a clock that has long ceased to speak its truth, and frames that hold memories of happier times. Every creak of the wooden floor reminds me of the weight of expectations, every shadow in the corner a testament to my sacrifices. I sit by the window in the evenings, the silence muffling my thoughts as I reflect on a life spent giving, wondering if I ever truly lived for myself. Each day is a reminder of the choices I made that prioritized others over my own well-being. I have learned to measure my worth not by what I have done, but by the quiet sacrifices that have defined my existence. Yet, as I navigate the routine of each day, cooking meals, watching over Elizabeth's busy schedule, and tending to Sophie's innocent requests, I am compelled to ask if there is still time to rediscover the parts of me I gave up long ago. I sometimes wonder if, amid the aching solitude and the constant need to be everything to everyone else, there might be a chance for redemption, a chance to finally see myself in a light that is as gentle and loving as the love I unabashedly poured into others. I live with the lingering pain of self-denial, yet hope sparkles quietly in the recesses of my mind, a hope that someday, when I no longer hide behind the practice of sacrifice, I might truly see the woman in the mirror again. Through every memory, every sacrifice made willingly, and every moment of quiet despair, I have come to understand that the true cost of love sometimes demands more than the heart can bear. And so, within the worn walls of this humble home, amidst the soft hum of a life filled with silent sacrifices, I continue to wait for the day when I can finally give myself the love I have so long denied. I entered St. Michael's Chapel on that fateful day with a heavy heart, already aware that something was amiss. The chapel had been transformed into a vibrant celebration, a whirlwind of colorful banners, gentle hymns, and the excited chatter of families and friends. Yet beneath the facade of festivity, I sensed a current of tension, swirling like a gathering storm. I clutched my purse tightly, my hands trembling, as I prepared for the moment that would redefine my very existence. From the moment I stepped through the ornate wooden doors, I felt the weight of expectations bearing down on me. The aroma of fresh flowers and candles mingled with the distant taste of bittersweet memories, and every step across the polished stone floor seemed to echo the silent accusations of years past. The altar, resplendent in its blend of tradition and modern touches, beckoned me into a scene where the sacred and the profane collided. I could feel eyes upon me, some filled with pity, others with barely concealed disdain. Then it happened, the moment that shattered the veneer of held-back emotions. As I found my reserved seat along the front row, Elizabeth's harsh voice sliced through the murmur of the gathering. "Grandma, you'll ruin the photos," she declared in a tone that left no room for misunderstanding. Her words, directed not only at me but at the fragile illusion of perfection, carefully maintained by those I loved, ignited a firestorm within me. I felt exposed, as if the years of sacrifice and quiet suffering had been laid bare before an audience that cared little for my pain. The room seemed to contract around me. I could feel my pulse racing, each beat a painful reminder of the many times I had been diminished in the name of duty. The mingling scents of incense and fresh linen turned acrid in my nostrils. My vision blurred as I struggled to comprehend how an event meant to celebrate new beginnings could also be the stage for my public humiliation. Friends and relatives exchanged glances, their whispers barely audible over the soft strains of the organ playing in the background. In that moment, I realized that the accolades of shared family history meant nothing when weighed against the sting of their indifference. I attempted to gather myself, to reply with measured words that might calm the rising tide of shame. But as I started to speak, a chorus of dismissive laughter echoed from across the room, halting my protest before it could fully surface. A familiar voice cut through the murmur. "Really, Margaret, must you always bring such a depressing aura?" It was uttered by a distant cousin whose tone was icy, a final blow that underscored my isolation. I felt the eyes of the congregation like sharp needles, each one a reminder of the countless times I had been made to feel small. In a brief interlude between the hymns, I tried to retreat into memory, recalling warmer times when I was not shamed for my vulnerability. I remembered the gentle evenings spent in the quiet intimacy of our family home, where my only audience was a silent reflection in a dusty mirror. Those were the moments when I dared to believe that perhaps my sacrifices were not in vain. But now, as I stood under the bright lights of the chaste altar, those comforting recollections were replaced by a chilling clarity, the realization that my life of self-denial had left me utterly unprepared for such public scrutiny. The physical reactions were immediate and overwhelming. My knees wobbled under the relentless barrage of stairs, and a surge of nausea threatened to overtake me as I struggled to breathe deeply amidst the chaos. I could feel the heat rise to my cheeks, burning with the intensity of humiliation and regret. Every sound, the rustle of program pamphlets, the soft murmur of prayers, even the distant clinking of glass, seemed amplified, each one a reminder that I was, in essence, alone. In the midst of the scandal, A brief conversation among the guests encapsulated the collective dismissal of my suffering. "She's always been a drama queen," one whispered, while another retorted, "Maybe it's time she faced the reality of her own life." A third voice, less certain but still cold, added, "I never understood why she never stood up for herself." Their words, sharp and indifferent, pierced me as deeply as any physical blow. In that charged atmosphere, I felt simultaneously invisible and painfully exposed, a solitary figure caught in a tidal wave of expectance and judgment. The church's atmosphere, initially festive and bright, now took on a surreal quality. The laughter and chatter of the surrounding crowd continued, as if the incident had been nothing more than a minor disturbance in their perfectly curated celebration. Yet for me, every second stretched into an eternity of internal torment. Amid the cold indifference, I longed for a safe haven, a quiet corner where I could simply disappear without having to confront the pain woven into every echo of that moment. As the ceremony trudged on, the grandiosity of the event stood in stark contrast to the profound loneliness I experienced. I could feel the burden of decades of self-sacrifice and concealment converge at this moment, leaving me raw and vulnerable in the glare of unforgiving stares. The symbolic significance of the altar, the centerpiece of an act that was supposed to unite us all, had instead become the stage for my public erasure. My chants of quiet anguish were drowned out by the clamor of rehearsed joy, a reminder that in this sacred space, my worth was measured solely by what I did not bring to the table. With every passing moment, I realized that I was being forced into a corner, a silent witness to the unraveling of both my dignity and the carefully maintained image of our family. The taste of defeat was bitter on my tongue, and the emotional floodgates had been left wide open. In the guise of celebration, the room had become a crucible where my most intimate faults were paraded as entertainment for others, underscoring a painful truth. Despite all that I had given, I was still seen as expendable. I left that troubled day shattered not just by humiliation, but by the stark reality that the very people I had poured my love into were capable of reducing my lifelong sacrifices to mere fodder for their casual dismissals. In the echo of dismissive remarks and the cold stares of those around me, I began to see that I was more alone than ever, isolated on a stage that no one cared to see me perform on, except for the painful memories I carried with me. I stood alone in the quiet corridor after the chaos had ebbed, my heart pounding like a frantic drum in a deep, silent cave. In that hushed moment, the emotions of the day collided inside me, a tempest of regret, sorrow, and a nascent spark of understanding. As I turned away from the lingering whispers of public humiliation, an overwhelming clarity embraced me. I realized that every tear, every silent sacrifice had been part of a long, exhausting pattern of self-abnegation. The sting of my daughter's accusations, the dismissive laughter of distant relatives, and the cold indifference of strangers had finally forced me to confront the stark truth. I had been living a life defined by giving, yet deprived of the nurturing love I so desperately deserved. In the solitude of those empty, dimly lit corridors, I began to sift through the shards of my broken past. Every memory, a fragment of childhood filled with whispered promises of hope, dim recollections of youthful dreams that slowly withered beneath the weight of responsibility, returned to me with piercing intensity. I recalled a time when I believed that love meant endless sacrifice, when my own needs were merely collateral damage in the pursuit of keeping our family whole. I saw, with painful lucidity, that each act of self-denial, each moment of silent suffering, was a thread in the tapestry of an identity lost to duty. It was then that I sensed the true pattern of the abuse and exploitation I had so long normalized. The realization came like a sudden, cold shock, a dialogue within myself that broke through years of muted resignation. I asked myself with a trembling yet resolute voice in my mind, why have I allowed myself to be treated as an expendable artifact, used and then cast aside? In that internal dialogue, a myriad of voices from the past intermingled with the present. The voice of a young woman full of dreams, the quiet lament of a mother who had sacrificed her own happiness and the desperate plea of a soul longing for recognition. I recognized that the price of my self-sacrifice had been steep, a lifetime spent curbing my desires, stifling my aspirations, and accepting subservience as my only path to love. As I retraced the steps of my journey back home through rain-soaked streets and down empty sidewalks, every drop of cold rain against my skin felt like a baptism, washing away layers of accumulated despondency. The rhythmic hiss of the raindrops resonated with the rhythmic beating of my heart, both a dirge and a promise of renewal. I found myself revisiting earlier memories from my youth, a time when I had hesitated at the precipice of joy, afraid to fully embrace my own worth. I remembered the countless nights spent in silent despair, bending under the weight of expectations that were never truly mine. Now, every regret transformed into a lesson, a hard-earned acknowledgement that I had the right to seek happiness and self-fulfillment. In the flickering light of a street lamp, I paused to lean against a damp wall, eyes closed as I gathered every ounce of courage within me. The chill in the air seeped into my bones, yet it sparked a fierce determination that warmed me from within. I began to internalize a new truth, that my emotions were valid, that my pain was not something to be ignored, and that the sacrifices I had made did not diminish my worth. In that precise moment, I decided that I would no longer allow my identity to be confined by the role of the martyr. I resolved to reclaim the dignity that had been eroded by years of unrecognized suffering. The clarity of that internal dialogue was both fragile and unyielding, like shards of broken glass, arranged into a mosaic. The fragments of my past coalesced into a new picture of who I might become, a woman who no longer sought validation solely through endless sacrifice, but who had the strength to assert her own value. I could sense that the act I had performed earlier, leaving that symbolic memento on the altar, was not just a desperate cry of defiance, but the commencement of a metamorphosis. It was the moment when I finally saw myself as deserving of the same love and respect I had so freely given to others. As I continued my solitary journey into the night, the memories of my past, once sources of plunged sorrow, gained a different hue. They became the stepping stones of transformation rather than markers of defeat. I recalled long-forgotten conversations with myself, moments when I had almost whispered the truth that I was more than my sacrifices. Now, buoyed by the weight of that newfound understanding, my inner voice thundered clearly. I deserved to be whole, to be cherished, and to stand in the light of my true self. In the quiet that followed my revelation, I could hear the echo of my internal dialogue reverberate like a promise. I recognized with undeniable certainty that the chains of guilt and regret that had so long bound me were beginning to dissolve. Every painful memory, every scar etched in the corners of my heart had led me to this singular truth. I will no longer live as a shadow of myself. I resolved that this moment of recognition was only the first step toward reclaiming my identity, toward finally allowing love, both for others and for myself, to flow without the pain of endless sacrifice. I reached a moment when the weight of my past became unbearable, and I knew something had to change. That day, after witnessing the fallout of my previous actions and feeling the raw sting of public and personal rejection, I made a decision. I decided to shatter the chain of submission that had kept me trapped for so many years. It began with small, deliberate acts that slowly, yet inexorably, redefined who I was. I found myself in the quiet of the early morning, long before the world stirred awake. The house was still dark, and I stood in the solitude of my kitchen, a place filled with memories of countless moments spent sacrificing my own dreams for the sake of others. On that cold, silent morning, I opened a forgotten drawer and retrieved a worn porcelain mug. This mug, once a gift from my mother, had always symbolized gentle endurance, a relic of the quiet strength I had inherited. As I cradled it in my trembling hands, I realized that it now represented something far different, a tangible reminder that my life was not meant to be defined by endless sacrifice and self-denial. I set the mug on the table and took a deep breath, willing myself to confront the ghost of every regret and rumor that had haunted me. In that moment, I resolved to reclaim my narrative by planning an action that would, in a quiet but undeniable manner, break the cycle. I began by drafting a list of small, brave steps, attending a community meeting where I would speak openly about my experiences, reaching out to a long-forgotten friend who had always seen me as more than just a caretaker, and most importantly, allowing myself to acknowledge the justice of my own emotions. Each item on that list was an assertion of my right to be heard, a claim to the dignity I had long denied. As the day advanced, I walked with deliberate calm toward the local community center, where an annual event was to be held, a forum for discussing personal growth and healing. I chose this venue because it was intimate and honest. It was a place where vulnerability was expected, not scorned. When I arrived, I found a circle of faces, some kind, some skeptical, and I took my place at a low table at the edge of the room, determined that my voice, often so soft and hidden, would now be heard. The session began with short introductions, and I listened as others shared their struggles. My heart pounded as I recalled the years of muted self-doubt and perpetual sacrifice. At last, my turn came. I hesitated, a fleeting moment when doubt crept in, threatening to drown my newfound resolve. Am I strong enough to speak of my own wounds? I wondered internally, my courage wavering momentarily as memories of past derision resurfaced. Yet the image of the porcelain mug and the silent promise it carried bolstered my spirit. I reminded myself that every scar, every regret, was part of the journey to reclaiming my identity. When I began to speak, my voice trembled initially, but the sincerity of my words soon filled the room. I spoke of long years spent sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of maintaining a semblance of order in a family steeped in unspoken secrets and hidden resentments. I described the quiet suffering, the times I had felt unseen, and the overwhelming loneliness that followed each act of self-abnegation. I explained how, in that hallowed moment of solitude, the realization struck that I had become a shadow of the vibrant woman I once dreamt of being. I recounted how the burden of expectation had transformed my life into a sequence of muted acknowledgments rather than triumphant acts of love for myself. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Others listened with empathy. A few whispered brief reassurances. "That's brave," or "I understand." But it was in the stillness of my own resolve that I felt the true impact of my words. I offered no theatrics, no dramatic outbursts. My action was measured, yet it resonated with a quiet power that came from years of internal struggle finally finding expression. In that space, I realized that my quiet revelation was the first step towards a future where I could finally assert my own worth. After sharing my story, I sat in silence, feeling a profound relief as if a heavy cloak had been lifted from my shoulders. The atmosphere around me shifted subtly. The weight of judgment that had so long defined my existence began to dissipate. I could see in the eyes of those around me a gentle recognition, a silent solidarity that affirmed my courage to break free from the confines of my past. In that small community center, my whispered confessions had ignited a spark not only in my heart, but I hoped in the hearts of those who dwelled in similar shadows. Later that evening, as I walked slowly back through rain-washed streets and passed under the soft glow of lamplight, I recalled each step I had taken earlier that day. The act of speaking out was both a defiant rupture from the life I had known and a tender reclaiming of my long-forgotten self. Every footstep resonated as a declaration of self-worth and the celebration of a woman who had finally decided that the time to be a silent martyr was over. I returned home with a profound sense of subtle victory, a remnant of the emotional storm that had raged within me now settling into a quiet calm. In the solitude of my study, surrounded by faded photographs and letters from a past I could now reframe, I allowed myself a moment of reflective joy. I had broken the pattern of submission with elegance and determination, and although the road ahead might be steep and fraught with further challenges, I had taken that vital first step. The echo of that morning's resolve, like a gentle reminder from the porcelain mug, would forever guide me towards a renewed life, one marked not by endless sacrifice, but by the courageous act of finally valuing myself above all else. In that transformative day, the doubts that once threatened to pull me back into old habits were quietly replaced by a clear vision to live fully, unapologetically, as the architect of my own destiny. And as I closed my eyes that night, I felt, for the first time in many years, that I had become whole again. The day of the christening arrived with a mix of anticipation and disquiet that I could hardly put into words. I woke early, the sky a pale wash of clouds and a light drizzle kissing the ground, a gentle reminder that even the heavens could share in my uneasy heart. I dressed in a simple, modest suit that I had worn on other important days, yet today it seemed to carry a weight of destiny that I had never felt before. Every step toward the car felt deliberate, calculated. Each mile passed as slowly as my racing thoughts. I was not merely headed to another event, but to a moment that would challenge the very foundations of my self-worth. When I arrived at St. Michael's Chapel, its stone walls were bedecked with bright banners and garlands, and the air was filled with the hum of excited chatter and the occasional burst of laughter. The transformation of this old church into a carnival-like venue struck me vividly. What was meant to be a festival of family joy now carried an undercurrent of expectation so dense that each smile from a relative felt like an unspoken judgment. I took a deep breath as I stepped inside, my eyes drawn immediately to the altar. A magnificent structure refined with modern touches, yet steeped in traditional symbolism. It was there, in that sacred place, laden with history and meaning, that the path of my day would diverge from what it had always been. Family members mingled, exchanging pleasantries that felt rehearsed, as if every conversation was a performance designed to mask a deeper, lingering pain. I watched Elizabeth, my daughter, as she flitted from one conversation to another, with an air of controlled composure, her eyes occasionally meeting mine with a sliver of disapproval and something fragile resembling concern. I could sense her internal conflict as she balanced her duty to protect her daughter's image with the piercing truth of our shared past. Meanwhile, the children dashed about in innocent exuberance, their laughter a bittersweet counterpoint to the tension that pervaded the room. Sophie's bright smile, so full of untainted hope, reminded me of what had once been lost to years of silent resignation. I took my seat at the front, near the altar, where I could see every detail of the ceremonial preparations. The floral arrangements, meticulously arranged by someone whose name I could not recall, spoke of a careful, unyielding effort to present perfection, a perfection I had long felt denied me. As the service began, the acoustics of the chapel carried the soft strains of organ music and the measured cadence of spoken blessings. The atmosphere felt surreal, as if time itself had slowed to allow the weight of each word to sink in deep. I sat, feeling every stirring emotion sharpen within me. Memories of dinners past, of whispered confessions in the night, of the sacrifices I had made, all merging into a singular, overwhelming presence. My thoughts danced between the past and the present. I remembered the long hours spent in the quiet stillness of our family home, in the dim light of a fading day, where I had often felt invisible among the very people I loved. Those memories were now brought into stark relief by the vivid display before me. I watched as older relatives exchanged glances that carried unspoken emotions, while younger cousins and distant kin interacted with a familiarity that seemed to gloss over decades of hidden hurt. Every moment was a contrast between what was expected and what resonated deeply within my spirit. The dichotomy between the bright, almost carnival-like festivity and the palpable tension in my heart was at once sickening and strangely beautiful. Then it happened. In a moment that seemed to suspend reality, I felt an overwhelming surge of clarity, a mix of defiance and liberation that coursed through me with every beat of my heart. I rose slowly from my seat, my legs trembling with the weight of long-held sorrow and newfound resolve. Every eye in the room, from the candid gaze of a friend to the measuring stares of family, seemed to fixate on me as I walked purposefully toward the altar. The silence that fell over the crowd was thick, each second extending into an eternity charged with anticipation. I reached the front of the altar where a small, unassuming space awaited the placement of a symbolic object. I paused there, heart pounding like a drum, as if each beat was affirming the necessity of my act. Without uttering a single word, I produced from my bag a cherished keepsake, a memento that had belonged to my late husband, William, and which I had kept hidden away for years. Its surface was worn by time and tears, a tangible piece of our shared history, laden with memories and unspoken truths. In that decisive moment, I pressed the memento gently onto the altar. The movement was slow but deliberate, a final act of defiance against a lifetime of self-neglect and quiet suffering. I sensed that in placing this object there, I was not only challenging fate, but also reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost to endless sacrifice. The reaction was immediate and palpable. A murmur spread through the congregation, a mix of astonishment, dismay, and, in a few fleeting glances, admiration. For a brief second, time seemed to hold its breath as every onlooker grappled with the implications of my action. The air grew thick with tension, the usual background sounds of praise and celebration morphing into a suspended silence. I stood there, a solitary figure against the backdrop of a grand ceremony, having chosen to interrupt the expected narrative with an act that was tender, yet powerful. As I stepped back, allowing myself to blend into the crowd again, I felt both terrified and exhilarated. The act had shattered the illusion of perfection that had long suffocated me, and set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter our family dynamics. The pixelated faces of the congregation, the soft rustle of silk and whispered frowns, all now carried a new meaning. That moment was not an end, but the beginning of a transformation, a quiet revolution in my own heart and perhaps in the hearts of those who had once dismissed me. I left the altar with a heavy mixture of sorrow and hope, knowing that the symbolic gesture was a declaration of my intent to no longer be confined by the past. The rest of the day passed in a blur of fleeting glances and subdued conversations, the initial shock gradually giving way to a reflective silence. In the aftermath of my act, I could see that the fabric of our family was beginning to fray at the edges, hinting at the possibility of rebuilding a more honest, tender connection. That christening day, with all its contradictions and raw emotions, had become a pivotal moment, a turning point on the path toward healing, acceptance, and ultimately, redemption. I had returned home that evening with the heavy burden of the day still pressing on my heart. The events at St. Michael's Chapel had unsettled every fiber of my being, and as I sat in the quiet of my dimly lit study, the unresolved questions and suppressed memories beckoned me to look deeper into my past. The house, with its creaking floorboards and lingering scent of old paper and faded perfume, seemed to whisper secrets in the silence. Something in the back of my mind urged me to search where I had long avoided, the dusty attic of Henderson Manor, where years of forgotten relics and memories lay hidden in neglect. Climbing the narrow staircase into the attic, I was immediately overwhelmed by the smell of must and aged wood. Shafts of light broke through a small circular window and illuminated motes of dust, each particle dancing like a memory, yearning to be recalled. I ran my fingers along the rough surfaces of old trunks and boxes, feeling the texture of faded fabrics and brittle paper. It was there, in a battered wooden chest tucked away in a far corner, that I discovered a bundle of aged letters tied together with a faded ribbon. One envelope in particular, its paper yellowed and fragile, bore a handwritten name that sent a chill down my spine. William. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon and carefully slid out the letter. The ink, though faded, was still legible. Each word was a ghost from the past echoing down the corridors of my memory. I sank down onto an old dusty chair and read the letter slowly, savoring each sentence as if it were a rare confession of truth. William's handwriting was unmistakable. It was the handwriting I remembered from secret exchanges between us in quieter times, before the shadow of despair and hidden pain had crept into our lives. The letter revealed that William had been forced into a desperate situation, a betrayal, and a secret alliance that had put him at odds with influential figures in our community. He spoke of his love for me and his hope that one day the truth would emerge, a truth that would explain his mysterious departure and the distortion of our family history. Reading those words, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Shock, sorrow, and a piercing sense of betrayal swirled inside me as fragments of long-forgotten events rushed back. I remembered late nights when I sat by candlelight, questioning his sudden coldness and distance. I recalled moments when I felt the subtle rift growing wider between us, the late-night phone calls and whispered conversations that I was not meant to understand. Now, with the letter in hand, I saw that every unexplained silence, every tearful goodbye, had been connected to a web of deception that I had never imagined. William's confession painted a picture of a desperate man caught in a storm of greed and fear, a man who had sacrificed our family's unity to protect secrets that could have ruined him. The room around me seemed to spin as I continued reading. With each paragraph, I deciphered clues that recontextualized the painful recollections of my life. There was mention of a hidden ledger, detailed accounts of transactions that hinted at corruption and betrayal involving not only him, but figures I later recognized as the very people who had subtly manipulated our family affairs. My heart pounded as I realized that the mysterious circumstances of his departure were intertwined with the deeper wounds that had long plagued me, wounds I had been so desperate to ignore. The letter did not absolve him of fault, but it did force me to see him as a man embroiled in a tragic drama, one with failures and fears as profound as my own. In between the neatly scribed lines of his confession, I found a small scrap of paper in which William had scrawled a single phrase: "I left the truth on the altar of my choices." That phrase struck me immediately, resonating with the act I had performed at the christening earlier that day. It was as if fate itself had conspired to bring me to this moment of revelation. The symbolic memento I had left on the altar was not only an act of defiance, it was also a key that unlocked a door in my memory, a door that revealed the painful truths I had long kept hidden. As I sat there, the emotions surged within me, a mix of anger, profound sorrow, and a slowly emerging resolve. I recalled the days of my youth when I believed that silence was a shield against pain, that hiding behind a veneer of duty could somehow protect me from the chaos of truth. The letter shattered that illusion, reminding me that truth, no matter how painful, was the only path to healing. The attic became a sacred space where past and present converged. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of old paper was a testament to the lives that had been lived and the secrets that had been buried. Tears streamed down my face as I realized how much I had lost by clinging to my silence. Not only had I lost the chance to truly know the man I had once loved, but I had also unwittingly allowed the betrayal to define my existence. In that deeply personal moment, I vowed to no longer hide from the truth. I knew that the revelations contained within that fragile piece of paper would reshape everything: the painful memories, the hidden betrayals, and the fractured relationship with my daughter Elizabeth, who had always seen my sacrifices as a source of shame rather than the desperate plea for love that they were. Slowly, I gathered the letter close to my heart and made my way back down the attic stairs, feeling both a sense of liberation and a heavy sadness for the life that had been. With every step, I was more determined to confront not just the spectral ghosts of my past, but also the pervasive doubt that had haunted me for decades. The discovery of this hidden truth was like a sudden burst of light in a long, dark corridor, a reminder that even amidst sorrow and betrayal, there could be a path to redemption. As I returned to my study, I began to draft a new narrative, a personal manifesto that set forth my desire to rebuild what had been broken, not merely for myself, but for every fragment of our family that lay scattered by past misdeeds. I resolved to share the truth with Elizabeth, to confront the wounds that had festered in silence for too long. I planned to meet her in a quiet cafe the next day, where, over cups of weak coffee and hesitant glances, I would reveal the letter and the story behind it. I knew it would be a painful conversation, loaded with accusations and sorrow, yet it was a necessary step if we were ever to find reconciliation. The discovery had awakened in me a renewed sense of self, a realization that my life was not defined solely by sacrifice and hidden pain, but by the courage to seek the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. I felt an inner transformation taking shape, a subtle yet profound shift from resignation to determination. The hidden truth, long confined to the dusty pages of a forgotten letter, was now my beacon. It would illuminate the path toward forgiveness, healing, and a future wherein I could finally claim the dignity that had been so long denied. In that quiet night, with the letter clutched tightly in my hand, I allowed myself a moment of vulnerable reflection. I imagined the faces of those who had wronged me, and those who had loved me despite everything. I thought of the silent screams, the unhealed wounds, and the shattered dreams, and I understood that revealing this truth was not simply about uncovering the past. It was about reclaiming my future, one honest, often painful step at a time. The journey ahead would not be easy, but I knew that truth, luminous and unyielding, would be the compass guiding me towards a destination of personal redemption and a healing that extended beyond the confines of our fractured family. I found myself standing at the threshold of a new understanding, a quiet revolution growing within me that was neither loud nor confrontational, yet overwhelmingly potent. In the weeks following the shocking events at the chapel and the painful revelation of my past secrets, I began to feel a stirring, a subtle call to reclaim parts of me that had long been relegated to silent shadows. I no longer felt the need to retaliate with anger or shout my sorrow into an indifferent world. Instead, I resolved to mend the fractured ties in my life through small, deliberate acts of compassion and introspection that spoke louder than any accusation. I realized that true justice could be found not in explosive retribution, but in the gentle acknowledgement and acceptance of my own pain. I started by returning to the familiar corners of my home where memories resided, not as burdens, but as pieces of a mosaic that told the story of who I truly was. Each creaking floorboard, every faded photograph, and the whisper of long-forgotten conversations in the quiet solitude of my living room served as reminders of both my vulnerabilities and my strength. I began to see that the years of silent suffering were not signs of weakness but of a deep, aching humanity. I would write letters to myself, long and rambling reflections that allowed me to revisit memories with honesty and tenderness. In turn, these written confessions became my silent testimony that acknowledging pain was the first step toward healing. I began to rebuild bridges with those I had once felt estranged from. There were moments when I reached out to Elizabeth, my daughter, who had long been ensnared in the tangled web of resentment and misunderstanding that defined our relationship. Instead of meeting her accusations with defense or tears, I listened attentively, as both of us tentatively explored the chasms that separated our hearts. We sat in quiet rooms, sharing cups of lukewarm tea, our conversations sparse but laden with significance. Over time, these hushed dialogues grew into earnest attempts at forgiveness, each of us offering apologies that were not forced, but flowed naturally from our shared recognition of suffering. In my quiet way, I was slowly restoring a sense of balance, demonstrating that justice was not an act of vengeance, but an internal commitment to make peace with the past. As days turned into weeks, I also sought a renewed connection with those who had once made me feel invisible. I found solace in small community gatherings, where the simple act of sharing a meal or a story was enough to dissolve years of isolation. I began visiting local support groups where others too carried hidden wounds, people who had learned, through varied hardships, the importance of silently acknowledging their pain rather than shrouding it in bitterness. In those gatherings, I offered my own story with trembling sincerity, a story of sacrifice, of regret, and finally, of tentative healing. These sessions helped me appreciate that my journey was not solitary. Many had walked similar lonely roads and had emerged not unscathed, but wiser and more compassionate. The quiet justice I sought was collective in its nature, a slow but sure movement toward a community where understanding replaced judgment. In the solitude of my favorite park, under sprawling trees, whose leaves whispered secrets of winter and spring, I would sit for hours and let the natural rhythm of life course through me. The gentle rustling of the wind, the distant murmur of a brook, and the soft cooing of birds provided a soothing counterpoint to my inner tumult. In those moments, I meditated on the idea that true strength lay in vulnerability. I learned to accept that my past, with all its pain and betrayal, was an integral part of my identity, and that embracing these scars allowed me to transform them into symbols of resilience. This acceptance was my silent justice, an internal reconciliation that did not demand external recognition, but nonetheless brought a profound sense of inner peace. I began to notice subtle changes in the way I approached everyday life, tasks that once seemed insurmountably burdensome, like answering a call from a family member with whom I had long ceased to communicate, or simply taking a long walk while reflecting on my innermost feelings, became acts of quiet rebellion against the cycle of self-neglect. I instituted small rituals for myself, lighting a candle at dawn, reciting affirmations in the mirror, and even creating a small sanctuary in my garden where I could place relics of the past alongside symbols of hope. These rituals helped me foster an environment of acceptance where the hurt was acknowledged, and slowly forgiveness began to bloom. I no longer felt compelled to hide behind a mask of perpetual sorrow or endless sacrifice, for I had learned that healing is a journey marked by both tears and gentle smiles. At times I met moments of doubt, a fleeting worry that my efforts might prove futile and that the bitterness of the past would forever overshadow the potential for renewal. But each time I found strength in remembering that every step, however small, was a victory in itself. The cumulative effect of these daily acts of self-kindness began to ripple outward, fostering a quiet transformation not only within me, but in my relationships with those around me. The family gatherings became less charged with unspoken tension. Even Elizabeth's once hardened gaze softened as we navigated this newfound terrain of emotions together. I realized that what I had long craved was not the admiration of others, but an internal acknowledgement that I was worthy of love and understanding. The silent justice I orchestrated was not about retribution. It was about reclaiming the dignity that had been eroded by years of concealed anguish. It was about finally accepting the entirety of my existence, the sacrifices, the losses, the bittersweet memories, and choosing to move forward with both gentleness and strength. In the quiet moments of reflection, as I penned my thoughts late into the night, I recognized that every struggle was a lesson in resilience, every tear a token of survival, and every act of forgiveness a step toward a future that might one day be filled with more light than shadows. This period of silent justice and acceptance, though arduous, became the crucible in which my renewed self was forged, a testament to the power of inherent dignity and the healing force of quiet, deliberate change. In the quiet aftermath of life's storms, I found myself standing at the crossroads of shattered memories and new beginnings, a place where the echoes of past betrayals softened into a solemn promise of healing. The final confrontation, long anticipated yet approached not with fury, but with raw vulnerability, had arrived. I met Elizabeth in a modest, sunlit room of a small cafe, the kind of space where confessions are shared over the gentle clink of porcelain and the subdued hum of quiet conversation. Her eyes, once filled with anger and guarded suspicion, now shimmered with cautious hope and shared sorrow. It was here, amid the lingering aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft rustle of newspaper pages, that we began to bridge the vast gap of years spent in silent estrangement. I spoke first, my voice trembling with the weight of decades. I recounted the lonely nights filled with self-doubt, the burden of unspoken sacrifices, and the relentless ache of secrets that had kept me confined in a shell of unacknowledged pain. I told her of the day at St. Michael's Chapel when I stood before the altar and left behind a symbolic memento, a piece of my heart that had long been encumbered by guilt and resignation. There, in the unfolding ritual of my own personal liberation, I discovered that redemption was not a gift to be given by others, but a treasure to be claimed within oneself. As I bared my soul, Elizabeth listened intently, her silence a testament to the deep currents of empathy that had begun to swell within her. Slowly, her icy demeanor melted into tears. She recalled her own nights of doubt, the moments when the burden of living up to expectations felt unbearably heavy. In that raw, unguarded exchange, We both realized that our individual sufferings were not isolated tragedies, but interwoven threads of a shared family tapestry, a tapestry marked by both beauty and flaw. In that moment, reconciliation began. The conversation shifted from recounting the past to envisioning a future rebuilt on transparency and mutual forgiveness. We acknowledged our collective failures, the missed opportunities for genuine connection, the walls of resentment raised to protect fragile hearts, and pledged to dismantle them together. The air in the cafe grew thick with a sense of fragile hope, as if every whispered apology and every tear shed was a small act of defiance against a history written in bitterness. We agreed to confront our family's painful legacy, not by erasing the scars, but by learning from them, allowing each hurt memory to weather into wisdom. I shared with her the discovery of the forgotten letter and the painful truths hidden in the attic of Henderson Manor. It was not merely the revelation of a husband's betrayal, but the unveiling of a life lived in silence that resonated deeply with both of us. Elizabeth confessed that her tough exterior had been a shield, a way to protect not only herself but also her daughter, Sophie, from the raw edges of a haunted past. With tears glistening in our eyes, we came to see that our greatest strength lay in the shared act of facing these truths head-on. By the close of that long transformative day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, we embraced a tentative, heartfelt gesture that symbolized the beginning of our shared journey toward healing. I felt a deep, resonant peace that had evaded me for so long. In the soft murmur of evening, I finally understood that true redemption was a continuous act of forgiving oneself and each other, a daily practice of loving despite the wounds. Now, as I step forward into a future reshaped by honesty, I carry with me the quiet assurance that deep familial scars need not be lifelong marks of shame. Instead, they can serve as enduring reminders of our capacity to overcome, to transform sorrow into strength, and to find beauty, even in imperfection. In our reconciliation, I discovered the freedom to love again, both myself and my daughter, in a manner as delicate and resilient as a whispered promise carried on the wind.